So today's webinar is jointly presented by CFICE, the Trent Community Research Center, and the McMaster University Office of Community Engagement. We have two presenters with us today. I'd like to introduce you to John Marris and Dave Heidebrecht. John Marris has worked with the Trent Community Research Center, or the T CRC, since September 2014 and took the role of Executive Director in October 2015. John has a long history of community development work both in Peterborough, Ontario, and over a 20-year period in the UK. As part of his work at the T CRC, John is part of a number of collaboratives that address mental health, addictions, social justice, and youth issues in the Peterborough community. Dave Heidebrecht is manager of McMaster University's Office of Community Engagement. Since graduating from McMaster's Masters of Globalization Studies program in 2010, Dave has worked directly with academic, nonprofit, and community organizations to help them work towards their goals. Especially interested in the intersections between environmental, political, and social issues facing our global society, Dave is very excited to be working with the Network for Community Campus Partnerships to strengthen relationships amongst colleagues, both at McMaster and in the community, who are working to address these issues in our communities. We're happy to have both of you here today. So John, do you want to take us into your discussion?
Thank you, Dave, for the introduction. First, let me say that the slides that we're looking at on the screen relates to a presentation that we give to students and host organizations and community partners when we're introducing the idea of community-based research. So they're not actually relevant to the first part of my talk here, and I will be coming to those in a few minutes. What I'd actually like to start with is something of an introduction to the Trent Community Research Center, or TCRC, and give you a little bit of history and just set out exactly what it is that we do and how we work. So the Trent Community Research Center is an independent community-based organization. We're a non-profit with charitable status. We're based in Peterborough, Ontario, and we've been doing this work for a little over 20 years. Our major funder is Trent University, but our community partners who we do research work for and historically foundations have also funded us. We also get funding from projects like CFICE. In a typical year, we develop and oversee 30 to 40 separate research projects with approximately 20 community organizations and somewhere between 50 and 60 students. And this is done with the equivalent of 2 full-time staff. Most of these projects are short projects done by senior undergraduates as single or double full-year credits. So research typically lasts 8 to 9 months. Students often work individually, but also in groups of 2 to 4. Excuse me. Some projects are also matched to graduate students as coursework or as a thesis. And to date, this has always been done at the master's level, but we are also open to projects being matched to PhD students as well. The type of work we do is very varied. For example, this year we've had projects on youth homelessness and projects on mitigating turtle injuries when crossing roads in the Peterborough County. We've had a project on reintroducing salamanders to a wetland, and also projects on post-prison accommodation for prisoners coming out of a provincial jail in Ontario. Other examples from this last year include developing tools for measuring urban and community food growing, reviewing accessibility of local businesses, conducting a survey on the experiences of local professional artists, and evaluating outcome data from a drug addictions and mental health diversion court. And these are just examples. There are many more projects that we've covered this year. There is something of a focus on social support, community development, and social justice, as this reflects the interests of the staff. Also, because Trent does not have programs in certain areas, we're not able to support projects in particular fields, such as engineering. We also have had a history of doing lots of environmental and conservation work. So what does community-based research, and more critically, a community-first approach to community-based research mean to us? So this is where I'm going to move into the presentation that is up on the screen at the moment. So when we introduce the idea of research to students and community organizations, often the image people have in their mind is white coats in a lab, people doing literature review work, I guess more often these days online search rather than a traditional library, but these are the images of traditional research. And this work can be expressed in the following diagram. So we start with intellectual curiosity. We start with the ideas of a student, usually a graduate student, or a professor, and a typical research cycle would be research design, literature review, primary field work, a generation of a report, and some form of evaluation to assess the validity of that work, which would then often lead into future research. At the heart of this is the interest of university professors or a graduate student. In community-based research, particularly with the focus on community-first approaches, we start with a question from the community. So it's research that directly involves the community's needs and their questions. And it's research that works with local organizations to support community change and bring the community and the university together. So this is about community-based research being a tool of community development. And critically for the Trent Community Research Center, this means starting with the interests of the community. So to re-express that with the same sort of approach to research that we saw before, we have research design, literature review, primary field work, we report results. But in this case, what the Community Research Center is interested in is something that always starts with community need. And this is the critical kind of difference between traditional academic research for us rather than community-based research. Community-based research is community first because it starts with a community question. We also work within a set geographical area. In the case of the Trent Community Research Center, that's mostly focused on the city of Peterborough and Peterborough County, but we also do undertake some projects in the city of Quarter Lakes, in the community of Northumberland and Durham. And we also have a sister organization, ULinks, that works out of Halliburton County. And local geographical specificity is important to us. We need to be immersed in the community in which we're working and developing projects in order to get this work right. So how then does the Trent Community Research Center broker community-based research opportunities? So this slide will show you the research cycle that we work with. The start point for projects is often a conversation between myself and one of my colleagues with a community organization. And as I've already expressed, that can be an organization with a huge variety of different interests, from local municipalities to justice organizations to social service organizations to a coalition of local neighbors. And we work with that organization to develop a community project, and we review the projects that are submitted by the community to make sure that they're going to be achievable by a student, and we talk to faculty and we talk to our colleagues about what level of the university they may be most effectively pitched. Are they going to be a graduate project? Are they going to be an undergraduate project? What types of research instruments are we going to use? Is it going to be literature review? Is it going to be survey, interviews, focus groups? Is it going to be a water quality assessment? Are we going to need to do work in a lab? So that's our first process. Once a project is designed and we have a project proposal, it's promoted through our website and through conversations with faculty and departments to students. And that becomes the project matching process. In most cases, this takes place through the second half of the summer and into early September, but we do match projects all year round. Depending on the scale of the project, sometimes small half-year projects can get matched in January. We also have some students who do their field work in the summer because that's the only time that they can get out into remote areas to do that work. The matching process can be with individual students doing a thesis or doing an independent reading course, but we also do projects with what we call our capstone classes, where a cohort of students in a particular department go through the process of doing their community-based research projects together. And those students can work as individual students, or they can also work as a team of 2 to 4 students. Once the projects are matched, then our role at the Trent Community Research Center moves into a supervision role. We take on a project coordination role to support these students through their research work. And this is, I think, a really critical part of what we do, that we are we are supporting the students as they're going through their research projects. And this allows us to take some of the pressure off the faculty, and it also allows us to make sure that the community interest is being supported and maintained throughout the research process. We do a lot of work with students to prepare them for the idea that when they do a community-based research project, it's rather different from the sort of conventional research work that they might do, or the conventional assignment they might do in another course, where they're maybe aiming for a grade or they're aiming to achieve a certain standard of work. But what we're focused on here is making sure that what we deliver to the community is a high-quality report that achieves the community change or the community knowledge that we want. So what are the challenges that arise in this work? And that's the last of our slides as well, and our website is there. So what are the challenges that arise in this work? Well, working with a university does bring up some challenges. Key sometimes is to understand the difference between the idea of community engagement and a community-first approach, and thinking about community-based research as experiential learning. There is a lot of pressure from the province in Ontario to give every student some form of experiential learning opportunity, and within this we see some danger of the key value of the community engagement and of community-first, community-based research being lost. Experiential learning as a way of thinking of this work draws the focus too much onto the student experience, and what we don't want to see is 5, 10, a dozen students being put on one project in order to make sure every student has that opportunity. For us, this presents some danger of damaging community relations because we don't think that's going to produce the very best projects. CBR at the Trent Community Research Centre is fundamentally about the idea of using the resources of the university to support Peterborough, which is a relatively impoverished community, and in the process give students a powerful learning opportunity. But our fundamental focus is that community development, community support piece. Some of the more mundane challenges, the day-to-day issues that we face are things like faculty intervening in a project and directing the students maybe in a direction that doesn't meet the community need, varying quality of students, students not always having the time that they need for their project, and also at times a perception at the university that community-based research is less serious than other forms of research work. Other challenges include the idea that timeframes are still those of the university. The academic year does not always meet the needs of the community, but typically we need to work within that academic year. For us, projects do lead into each other. The conclusion of one project is often a stimulus to the emergence of the next project, but we're not resourced and set up to do trial projects in the community and then manage the evaluation of those projects. We do work with organizations who are doing development projects in the community, and we help with evaluation work on that, but there are often times when we think of projects that would be very useful to set up in the community that we don't have the time or the resources to put together. What makes this model that we work with successful? I would say that it's a genuine passion for the community and community development. I think also the key role of the project coordinator. We survey and research our students and community partners at the end of each academic year, and they reinforce for us that the project coordinator, being this extra person in the process, is an extremely valuable part of the student's experience, and it reassures the community that their interests and their voice isn't going to get lost in the research process. A close relationship between that coordinator and faculty and a setting out of the terms of the projects very carefully at the beginning with faculty, hosts, and students is also key for success. Preparing students with the idea that what they're doing is more than an ordinary class, it's more than an ordinary paper, is a key part of our preparation process. Getting the students to understand that there are people outside of the faculty-student relationship who are going to be impacted by a project that doesn't complete or has problems. Also encouraging those students to approach us for help when they need it. I would say if you're an organization thinking about developing community-based research at a university or engaging community-based research within a university, then I think building in this project coordination capacity is really important. And also developing training for both faculty and students on what community-based research and a community-first approach to it is going to achieve. We haven't spoken about service learning here, but both service learning experiences and a half-year course in community-based research methods would be good prerequisites for students taking on a full-year project. Another thing to consider is the use of senior graduate students to support undergraduates in their work. We've had a lot of success in the past with graduate teaching assistants working with the center. And this is something that we see as a really valuable part of the process of community-based research. It gives those grad students an opportunity to learn new skills, but it also adds to our capacity. One of the things I just wanted to highlight is that though we take this very community-first approach to our work, one of the challenges of that, and this really comes up under the challenges heading, is that there are times when community partners aren't always aware of the possibilities of research. So there are times when we will make suggestions to community partners about what types of research we feel would be most useful for that organization, but we want to do that in a way that's very sensitive to not adjusting the aims and interests of that organization and their research work, because it's something that we've generated. I think that pretty much covers all that I wanted to talk about. Just in conclusion, this work is often very challenging and involves holding an interesting balance between the varying interests of the students, the faculty, and the community partners. And this sometimes makes it not easy work. But at this time of year, as projects are concluding, and we have some 30+ projects concluding this month, there is an enormous reward in seeing students present results to the community partners, who then clearly express how the research is going to help their organizations and be part of the future development of the Peterborough community. I think that covers it for me. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thanks, John, and hi, everyone. And I think where John wrapped up there, it's a really good point to reflect on in terms of it being April. At least in Hamilton, the sun is shining, but it's been a busy few weeks visiting various projects and presentations to see what the fruits of our collective labor have been with McMaster and community partners, and to see the student efforts. Oh, can everybody hear me okay? Sorry about that, folks. Yeah, it's an important time to reflect on why we do this work, and I think in hearing John reflect on the opportunities and challenges, I would reinforce each and every one of those. So I won't do that, given that you probably want to hear something different. And when John and I were preparing this with Nicole and Dave, thought we might step back and give you a sense of the institutional approach we've taken at MAC, and then jump into some details on how we specifically broker, and looking forward to the conversation afterwards. So with that being said, over the next 15 minutes or so, I'm just going to cover our community engagement history more recently, very briefly, go into what the Office of Community Engagement does, give you some examples of what we've brokered very recently, and then speak about some of the challenges and successes of our model. So that being said, I'll really briefly give you a history of our recent path in community engagement. MAC has a long history of community engagement, but we had a network for community campus partnerships that was formed in 2013, which has really given us more of a focus on how we broker relationships with local communities. And I also just want to put our definition of community engagement in front of folks so you have a sense of how we understand it as valuing the expert knowledge and passion that members of the community have about their communities, ongoing collaboration between university and community partners, and something that really reinforces our role is to perform research, teaching, and service with community members and partners for the public good. Our most recent history started about 7 years ago when our current president, Patrick Dean, identified community engagement as a priority, which I think is fairly unique in that a president noted that it's really important for us to contribute to the greater good, and that's really set the tone for the work that we've done over the past 7 years or so. And as a result of that, we formed a network for community campus partnerships in 2013, the purpose of which was to provide a shared framework for the university to support its goals related to community engagement. So this visual gives you a sense of that in terms of the Venn diagram in front of you. We have 5 roles to play at the university. That's knowledge broker, facilitator, advisor, liaison, and sponsor. And this visual just gives a sense of some of the ways that we've done that over the past year as we support research, education, and service partnerships. Something to flag on the left side is that we have a number of liaisons who connect to the network in our office through our various faculties and other units across the university, while we have also developed a number of relationships and connections, which is the theme of this webinar, throughout the Hamilton community, and our job is to foster those connections based on the relationships we have at the university and the relationships that we have in the community. So that being said, when we were formed, the work that we were doing was very much internally focused. And so in 2015, we stepped back to look at how we could develop a strategic plan, not only with our partners here at McMaster, but also with our community partners. And so this vision that you have in front of you, working together for an inclusive, sustainable Greater Hamilton, is the vision that we co-developed over a year of strategic planning. And we've got 4 goals that have informed our work since then. The first is to embed principles of community engagement in all that we do. The second is to build bridges between the university and the community, both inviting community partners onto campus, but also being proactive members of the Hamilton community. And building on the relationships that we make through building those bridges, we strive to align and partner and really co-develop research, education, and service projects. And I think that's really what we're striving towards in terms of that community-first approach. And finally, our last goal, is to assess and learn from the work that we're doing together so that we can continue to improve upon what we're doing over the coming years. So something that I'd really like to highlight in terms of that community-first approach is when we developed that strategic plan with our partners, both on and off campus, folks had noted that we need some sort of values that can guide our work together. So we created a set of action-oriented, co-developed principles of community engagement. And similar to the theme of today's webinar, it's no surprise to us that that foundational principle of community engagement for us is relationships and the importance of strong and respectful relationships. 5 other principles that we embed within the work that we do and that we strive to do each day are reciprocity, equity, continuity, openness to learning, and a commitment to act. Finally, just as John mentioned, the focus of the Trent Center, our focus is on the Greater Hamilton community. So while the university develops partnerships locally, nationally, and globally, the role of our office is to foster research, service, and education partnerships between the university and the Greater Hamilton community. So what is it that we actually do, and how do we broker partnerships? So just to give you a sense of the role that we play, again, I've got the Venn diagram there in the middle with that broker, facilitator, advisor, liaison, and sponsor role. But also want to flag that what we strive to do is to build capacity, reduce barriers, improve communication, and facilitate dialogue. So we do that through a number of ways. The first way is we have a number of programs and partnerships, and I'll go through these relatively quickly. We have something called CityLab Hamilton that provides undergraduates with partnerships with City of Hamilton staff, and that's in partnership with Mohawk College, Redeemer University College, and the City of Hamilton. We've created an undergraduate curriculum that includes a level 2 Foundations of Community Engagement course as well as a minor. We have started piloting a research shop which responds to community-based research requests, and I would say is most closely aligned with the role that the Trent Center plays, but much younger and less developed, and I think we can learn a lot from John and his colleagues and how they've developed the Trent Center. McMaster Community Poverty Initiative is a partnership between community and campus partners looking to address the systemic issues of poverty in our community. Change Camp Hamilton is a partnership that we have developed with the McMaster Students Union to introduce students to community issues. And finally, the Community Campus Co-Laboratory is an initiative that we've developed to co-develop partnerships through a social innovation model that I'll speak about in a few minutes. Second, we have working groups through the network. So when we get requests in from community and campus partners, we field those requests initially through the office, but then navigate through a few working groups that can help us to identify who we can connect them with across the university. So we have a research facilitators group that has colleagues in each of our 6 faculties who help to develop research partnerships. We have a community-based research working group that is working on building capacity for CBR at the university. Similarly, we have a community-engaged education working group building capacity for community-engaged education, a service working group for service, and finally an experiential education directors group that has colleagues in each of our 6 faculties and central units that can support student partnerships. So We get requests both from the campus end of things and from the community end of things, and then field them through these various programs and working groups to try to make a match. So how do we actually broker those? I basically put on this slide a few different examples of the types of requests that we get, and underneath each are the programs or roles that have helped in providing our response and developing a partnership. So the major role that we play is trying to figure out the best route to take and the best match to make based on the request, whether that's coming from the community or from the university. And I won't go into detail on these, but just want to flag again that we facilitate research, education, and service partnerships and really make use of our colleagues across the university in ensuring that we can make the best match possible. So to give you two examples, I think as John mentioned, a lot of the work that they do is over the summer and then over the course of the year. These two examples that I've got in front of us are from this past winter. So these were relationships that we brokered over the course of the fall and were embedded into the curriculum this winter. So the first one is a community request. The initial contact came from a colleague who knew of our office, who is at a church downtown Hamilton that is reimagining how they can make their space more accessible to the community. So I joined an advisory committee, and through that role, identified an opportunity with a health sciences course that does community-based research, facilitated an introduction to the faculty member who oversees that course, to the colleagues at the church, and out of that, students were involved in a project this past winter where students helped to facilitate a community workshop with about 30 different community partners and have been working since then on follow-up research and evaluation with the church. On a campus end, an example that happened this winter is a colleague who teaches a course in health, aging, and society had said the course is expanding, we're looking for some additional partners, and came to us to see if we knew of anybody. So we brokered that request and identified the potential partners we knew of who had submitted requests to us most recently, and we're able to facilitate a partnership with a neighborhood organization that is working on beautifying alleys in Hamilton. And I think something to flag with that, to John's point, is that one of our staff members, Sushena, who's on this webinar today, spent a great deal of time supervising and working with the students to foster that connection. So I think it's really important to flag the time and energy that needs to go into the work, which resulted in a new toolkit for alleyway cleanup and a video that was used this past weekend as volunteers and members of the community came together to clean up alleys in a number of neighborhoods throughout Hamilton. And finally, something I'd just like to flag very briefly is our community campus co-laboratory. And this is something that we've developed with partners since we launched our strategic plan. And we're trying to use social innovation to bring together teams of community and campus partners to co-develop strategies that can address community-driven issues of shared interest. The ultimate goal is to foster new partnerships that can test and prototype ideas for solutions to major challenges that can be tested on a small scale with the hopes of scaling up to a systems level. So we launched this in 2016. We have 4 pilot labs at this point that have 4 faculty leads and 4 community leads. So we're hoping those can be co-developed around mobility, digital literacy, food insecurity, and business out of the box. And we're really excited to continue exploring how this model can be used as a way to co-develop those partnerships as we're responding both to community and campus requests. And an example to give is with our Business Out of the Box lab, which is using shipping containers to create small business spaces for low-income individuals. Just this year, we included both engineering students from a design perspective and a social work student from an engagement and resident engagement perspective. And we're also hoping to engage humanities and business this coming year in terms of a social enterprise perspective. So really hoping to foster that interdisciplinary approach to partnerships. So having said that, just want to flag a few challenges and then some successes, and then we'll wrap up from there. In terms of challenges, there's a few listed here, and I'll just touch on a few. We have a very broad mandate, so we have to navigate partnerships across research, education, and service. And we have a very small staff complement of 2, so it's a matter of how do we manage our time and how do we navigate those requests as they come in. We also want to make sure that what we're doing is of value to the university as a whole, so making sure we're serving all of our faculties as well as other units and benefiting that broader culture shift that we're trying to encourage. Documenting impact is something that we often have to respond to, and we're in the midst of a developmental evaluation to better share stories of the outcomes of the partnerships that we broker. And finally, a really important point to note, and I think John spoke to this too in terms of the time and energy it takes, is we're trying to balance that time to support our existing programs and partnerships that I mentioned, while also responding to new requests as they come in. And an example of that most recently, as John was alluding to, the Career Ready funding that has come out through the province. Our office has spent a great deal of time over the past 4 or 5 months to facilitate Career Ready funding coming into the university, and that can be of great benefit, but it also takes time out of our schedules and away from some of those other programs and partnerships. So that's a challenge that we are navigating on an ongoing basis. And finally, in terms of successes, I'll highlight a few of those listed here. I think we're very unique in that we have been given a mandate from our president, and we have the support of our president, but we've really attempted to use the network to support a grassroots approach to build capacity across the university through a broader culture shift. And it's been really exciting to see how various folks across campus and in the community have taken this up over the past few years. So that's been something that's really exciting for us. Another piece that really is the focus of this webinar is the importance of relationships. They're so key to the success of this network. It's really important for us to have strong relationships both on and off campus so that we can navigate any challenges that arise, as they always will, and that we have built in that integrity into our work in terms of making sure that people understand that we're really attempting to do this in a principled way. And finally, I think the last thing to highlight in terms of successes is this network model has really helped to reduce silos and provide an approach to community engagement that everyone can see themselves being a part of. And that's something we really strive to continue across from anywhere from humanities to business to engineering to health sciences to science and social sciences. And where are we headed next? Just to wrap up, we're halfway through our first strategic plan that was co-developed with community partners. So we're continuing to pursue the goals and objectives we co-developed together. And the network is also 5 years old this September. So we plan on having a number of dialogues beginning in September, both to celebrate how far we've come in the past 5 years, but also to critically reflect on the work we're doing, the role we're playing, what's working and what's not, and to continue co-developing our shared future plans. And at the end of the day, we really want to make sure that we're continuing to do this with integrity and in a principled way, because at the end of the day, that's what matters in terms of making sure we're contributing to what our partners want to see, both in the community and on campus. And I think I'll wrap it up there and thank everyone very much and pass it back to Dave to take us to the next aspect of the webinar.
That's great, Dave. Thank you. Sorry for the technical problems, everyone. Hopefully everything is sorted out now and you can hear me speaking. So assuming that that is the case, I'm going to just make some general comments about what we heard from John and Dave, which, to be honest, I mostly heard in the rehearsal. I didn't hear most of what was being said because of technical issues on my end. So there may be some misfits between what I'm saying and what was just said. So I think that the fundamental difference between the two organizations and the way that the two organizations run, obviously the one is inside the university and the other one is outside the university, but really what Dave is talking about is a university-wide strategy to approach the relation with the community, to approach community engagement in the broadest sense on a university-wide basis, whereas what the T CRC does in Peterborough and at Trent University is much more narrow, much more focused on a particular type of work, particular type of research project with a particular time frame, repeated a number of times. So it's a very different scale of operation, and I think makes for some interesting contrasts. And I think both presenters alluded to trying to keep in balance the pressures for experiential learning coming from the university and coming from the province, and coming from students and faculty, and meeting community needs at the same time. And sometimes those things are in conflict with one another, or sometimes those things need to be managed carefully. And I think we have a question that we'll get to later on about power imbalances between the university and the community, and that's something that I know is a concern and has been a concern of our work at the TCRC to try to mitigate those obvious power imbalances between the university and the community. I think both Hamilton and Peterborough are interesting cases because they're both situations where the university at one point was a fairly minor institution in the civic life and in the economic life of the city, and that has transformed in the case of Peterborough at least, pretty dramatically, that the private sector has eroded to such an extent that the university is one of the major employers and one of the major economic drivers of the community. And that may not be quite so dramatically the case in Hamilton, being part of the Golden Horseshoe and experiencing development boom recently. But in both cases, I think there was an assumption up until about 20 years ago that the university was not a key player in the community in the way that it is now. And I think the university Trent University at least, has been slow to absorb that idea and still thinks of itself as primarily a place that trains people how to do things and doesn't think of itself in terms of its impact in the community. And it's inspiring to see that McMaster seems to be taking a different approach, that community engagement is not something that's left to a small organization beside the university, but that is sort of suffused through the university as a whole. And I think that that's a really profound difference. So I think because we had technical difficulties, I think I'm going to leave it there and go straight to the questions. So the questions that we have in advance were not addressed to anyone in particular, so I'm going to address them to both the presenters and see what both of them have to say about it. If anybody who's present also has questions, for sure put them in the chat, but we'll start with the ones that were written in advance. So Abina asks, how can power be navigated or checked when university and community partners do community-based projects? How can community still keep autonomy in community-based research when the university is funding? So John, do you want to take that one?
Sure, Dave, thank you. I can take that one, but I'm sure that Dave also has some thoughts on that as well. I think the outset on this, the fundamental thing is about a trusting relationship between the point of contact with the university and the community organizations. And the Trent Center has done a lot of work on trying to build those trusting relationships in the community. That there is a certain autonomy that comes for us in supporting those community needs by being an external organization, but we do also have to recognize that our major funder is the university. I do also feel that this is probably something that people may get a little tired of me going on about, but the role of this project coordinator, the role of this individual who is involved in helping the community organization develop their research project and is involved in then finding an appropriate student and faculty combination to take on the research project and then supports the students through their work is a really critical part of protecting that community interest. Myself and my colleagues, our role is not to necessarily meet the ideal needs of the community, the university, and the faculty, but to do our best to make sure that those resources of the university are directed in the interests of the community. And we do also have to work carefully within ourselves to just witness that we're not doing the same thing of directing research in areas that particularly interest us or move projects that are from their original target. So reflexivity on that is pretty important. But I think that the key is those long-term trusting relationships that we've built up over the years with different organizations. Most of our community partners we've worked with for a number of years, and we've worked with well over 100 different organizations in Peterborough over the last 20 years. So maybe Dave wants to also offer some thoughts on that.
Yeah, Dave, go ahead if you have. Did you have thoughts on that, on the question of power?
Yeah, and I would echo John in terms of the trusting relationships piece. And I think our role in our office is really to play that broker role, Dave, as you've pointed out, at that broader institutional level. And for example, early on when this shift was happening about 5 or 6 years ago, I think there was a lot of understandable and healthy skepticism in the community about whether this is just a PR move. Is the university really committed to this? And we are. And there are definitely a number of ways that the university is doing this in terms of those experiential learning, career-ready policy influences from the province and otherwise. But we really, at the end of the day, are trying to guide our work through those principles. And I think we have a role to play in navigating power. An example is with these experiential learning opportunities that are coming out of the province, a big role we're playing in our office is to really encourage folks who are developing new opportunities to think about how that will impact the community and how to bring the community on board to say, is this something you actually want? And if so, how could we work together to navigate a partnership that will be mutually beneficial? So we really play that role of advising and trying to shape institutional initiatives as they move along, which then hopefully when they land as more solid initiatives that would be similar to how the Trent Center operates, they've been done in a principled way so that it's really community driven at the end of the day.
That's great. Thanks, Dave. So we have a couple questions from the chat. One is specifically towards John, and the other one is specifically towards Dave. So maybe we can get a quick answer from each of you. So I don't know if you've seen those, but Rihanna asks, are there roles within the regional universities that work with the staff at Trent Center to coordinate the community engaged learning experience, or is that role fulfilled entirely by the Trent Center? So do you want to take that, John?
Sure. So Rihanna, the Trent Community Research Center exclusively at this time works with Trent University, so we are only working with one institution. But to answer the question in the context of that institution, there are other places within the university that certain community engaged learning experiences take place. There are practical components to certain professionalized programs. There are certain faculty who are developing their own forms of community engagement that we don't necessarily get directly involved in. So in that sense, we don't act as a gatekeeper but to community engagement for the university. Though as the university develops more of a policy on experiential learning, I think that's something of a role that will emerge within Trent University. And we also very much kind of coordinate with certain key staff and faculty within the university who understand the ways that we work and who have an existing knowledge of community engagement, and they become kind of key point people within the university that we can work with. We can go to, and often a project in development gets put under the noses of a number of faculty before we finalize it, just so that we get a sense that the faculty feel that this is also going to head in the right direction. I hope that answers your question. I'm not entirely clear I have, but if not, please comment again.
That's great, John. So Dave, there's also a question from Steve Hill, I think, asking about to expand on the notion of partnerships with the student union, which isn't something that, to my knowledge, happens at Trent. Steve and John and I are all experienced in doing this at Trent. So do you want to comment on that role of students actively engaging in creating campus community engagement?
Yeah, definitely. And I think the thing to point out is the value of that network that we've created again, because the MSU is one of many units on campus that have a member at that table. And so this Change Camp partnership developed through a very active student leader, Rodrigo Nero Perez, a few years ago, who said, we want to figure out how students can connect better with what's happening in Hamilton. And I think we have to really remind ourselves at the end of the day that we are learning institutions, and it's our role to provide those principled and structured opportunities and to really set students up for success. So what we said to Rodrigo and his colleagues is, tell us about what you're hoping to do. Let's develop an idea, and similar to any other partnerships we develop, let's bring it to our partners in the community. Share it as a concept first and say, does this work? Does this make sense? And go from there. And that's how we co-developed this Change Camp Hamilton that's been running for 4 years now. and is engaged with hundreds of students and community partners. And for example, I'm now meeting with the newest VP administration tomorrow to think about how to engage with students for their Welcome Week this September and to embed community engagement. And again, what I'll say to her is, what are your ideas and who can we connect you with in the community and how can we work together? And I think it's really, again, at the end of the day, I know we're being repetitive here, but it's about building those relationships. And I think we've been able to build a solid relationship with the Students' Union overall over the past few years. We now know some of the students who are coming up into leadership positions. And I think it's really like any partnerships we're trying to develop, it's how can we collectively develop ideas and deliver on them so that we're all finding benefit. And I think if you take that approach, the sky's the limit.
That's great. Thanks, Dave. So we don't have any more questions from the chat. So let's go to one more question. Maybe we have a question. Oh, Jason is typing, but we also have a question from Jason. Pre-asked questions from Jason. But I guess I'll go ahead with the one that we have in advance, which is about research grants. What percentage of TCRC and McMaster office funding comes through funding written into research grants? Some of our post-secondary partners here in Ottawa say they often budget for community facilitators when submitting research grants, and some thought that could be a revenue stream to support community-based brokers here in Ottawa. So, John, do you want to talk about that?
Sure, yeah. So, hi, Jason. The answer for the Trent Community Research Centre is not a huge amount of our funding comes through research grants, though historically it has been more part of what we do, particularly through projects like CFICE. To give an example of something that sounds close to a community facilitator role, we do have a project running with a local organization here in town at the moment where myself, that has a student connection, so there are graduate students working in this project, and I have a role as a kind of community reflector who goes to meetings, goes to the research meetings and takes on a reflection role to again make sure that the community's interest is being supported and to bring the expertise of the Trent Community Research Centre to those conversations. And we get paid for that, which is great. We also have a relationship with the County of Peterborough where they've given us a funding package that we can draw down on when we're doing work for that, or for projects that relate to county-owned properties or projects that are of specific interest to the municipality of the County of Heidebrecht. So there's some support and funding coming from that direction, but it's not a major part of it. In terms of what percentage, I would say less than 20%.
Okay, great, John. Dave, do you want to take that question about funding grants?
Yeah, sure. So something to flag is that our office doesn't necessarily have any specific research grants. Our office, we're very fortunate to have our budget is 100% operational, which is really important and I think signifies the university's commitment to our work. And I know that there's a variety of examples across the university of how our partners, both through research and education, are attempting to acknowledge and recognize the contributions of their community partners. Two examples that we're more responsible for: we have a small grant, Catalyst Grant Fund, that goes out each year. It's $1,000, so it's relatively small, but really just to foster new partnerships in coming together. And that grant money can be used for students, community partners, or otherwise. So that's much less restrictive in terms of the traditional grant avenue and what's allowed. And then we've just launched our inaugural President's Award for Community Engaged Scholarship, which will be recognizing an exemplary research partnership that really models the principles of community engagement. And there's a significant financial award with that will be put towards furthering that research partnership, and those dollars will be able to be used for students and the community partners to move their project forward together. So those are a few examples from our office.
That's great, thanks. So we have one more written in question that we want to try to get to. I see also Peter has typed a question. Let's try to very quickly answer Robert's question, which is about having pre-contact with organizations. How do you get in touch with organizations to let them know about the opportunities to do research before you begin to discuss specific research projects? So do you want to quickly answer that, John?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think this actually goes back to something that came up in Dave's presentation of the challenge between time to develop the new while supporting the existing work. We do reach out to the community when we have time to do it, but in general, we have enough demand coming to us from the community that we haven't for the last 4 or 5 years had to kind of initiate any community conversations. Though in the past we have hosted community events in order to raise awareness of the sorts of work we do. I mean, we do have one major community event each year. At the end of each academic cycle, we have a big poster presentation event where all that year's students' work is put on show, and that event is open to the public, and we do get people who come through the doors of that event and then connect with us in the days and weeks that follow, asking us to help them develop research projects.
That's great. Dave, do you also want to comment on that, reaching out to organizations? You talked about it in your presentation, but if you want to expand on it a bit.
Yeah, I'll jump in really quickly. I know we're tight on time, but we have a number of events each year. Our Change Camp is an annual event where both community and campus partners come together, and we actually also have an idea exchange on May 14th where we have over 100 people registered already from community and campus to share projects they're working on. So we have community and campus partners presenting, as well as some roundtables to talk about how do we actually build partnerships, what are some of the challenges, what are some of the successes, how can we learn from those shared lessons. And I'm going to paste the link to that event in the chat box in case anyone's interested in coming down to join us. But yeah, it's an ongoing dialogue and conversation as you've gathered today. Our role is to really play that catalyst role, less so to develop specific programs such as the Trent Center would be seen. And so we try to do our best to facilitate dialogues on a regular basis to bring those partners together.
That's great, Dave. Now, maybe one last question from Peter Andre that came up in the chat about, I don't know if you saw it, Dave, about the use of infrastructure, university infrastructure, to support community engagement. And I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. And
yeah, funnily enough, Peter, I responded to an email late last night from our VP administration about that. And I think what the value of our network is that we're then able to hear where different requests are coming in at different levels of the university, and people at this point know the role we play. So our job is very much to connect those dots, and we have colleagues who have been engaged with McConnell in that conversation around social infrastructure, and colleagues working on the experiential learning aspect at the provincial level and understanding our social and cultural and economic impacts. And over this summer, we'll likely be bringing folks together to discuss how we're responding collectively as a university. And I think that's the value of the network, is that as we hear these various things bubbling up, we can then pull people together to have a conversation about how we can take a collective and coordinated approach as a university.
That's great. Okay, so that comes to the end of our Q&A, and we had by the end we had more questions than we could answer. So I guess we'll just have to ask those questions directly to one another outside of the webinar. So we're at the end of the Q&A.